Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to the best horror movies of all time from the year 1980. We're ready to now tackle the 80s, the most impressive year of horror genre ever. These are the best films from 1980 through 1989. We're going to cover each year of the decade of the 80s. Let's start off with first, 1980. Mind you, a lot of films have not come out yet. Some have just started their franchises. You're going to see which ones were the hits and misses, which ones were the best jump scares, the duds, the corny, cheesy horror films. We got it all. But first, since it's almost Halloween season, why not kick off and start with the best horror films of 1980, all right? We scoured the entire movie collection. These are the best films that were released in 1980, the best horror, creepiest, scary movies that came out for the year 1980. Let's check them out. Witching Time. At the isolated Woodstock farm in rural England, workaholic composer is depressed because his wife is unfaithful. And so then a voodoo doll is created, and then everybody loses it and dies. The 13th Reunion. Ruth, a reporter for the women's section of the newspaper, participates in a weight loss course with a hidden secret behind it. Drama, horror, and mystery. The 13th Reunion with Julia Foster. Visitor from the Grave. A former mental patient kills her would-be rapist, but this corpse returns from its secret grave. Visitor from the Grave will not disappoint. So if you like jump scares, check this movie out. Alien 2 on Earth. Astronauts become monstrous hosts inhabiting creatures after a space mission. Cave explorers encounter these beings underground. Survivors trying to escape, fighting the threat. Alien 2 on Earth. The Alien Dead. A meteor hits a houseboat, turning its occupants into zombies feeding on alligators. As reptiles dwindle, they target townspeople. The Alien Dead. This movie is corny, funny, and scary. The Alien Dead. There's another movie poster there. We can't miss it. But if you like comedy, horror, and sci-fi, The Alien Dead will not disappoint. It stars Buster Crabbe as Sheriff Kowalski. Check out The Alien Dead. Next up we have is Alligator. A pet baby alligator is flushed down a toilet and survives in the city sewers. 12 years later, it grows to an enormous size and has a diet of people. Alligator. Altered States. A psychophysiologist experiments with drugs and sensory deprivation tank and has visions he believes are genetic memories. Altered States is a body horror, and sci-fi. Anthropophagus. A group of friends and a hitchhiker become stranded on a tourist island where they are stalked by a disfigured cannibalistic killer. Slasher horror. Anthropophagus or Anthropophagus. The Awakening. An archaeologist discovers his daughter is possessed by the spirit of an Egyptian queen. To save mankind, he must destroy her. I will destroy you. It's with Charlton Heston. The Awakening. Beyond Evil. An architect and his wife move into a colonial mansion where the demonic presence of the original owner's wife takes residence. Beyond Evil, featuring John Saxon. Blood Beach, parody supernatural horror. Something is attacking and killing people on the beach. David and Mariana, old friends, search for clues where they played as kids to uncover the mysterious creature. Blood Beach. The Boogeyman. Through the reflection in the mirror, a girl witnesses her mother's boyfriend's murder. Slasher horror. The Boogeyman with Suzanne Lane and John Carradine. Cannibals on the Street. Mentally unstable Vietnam vets who were held captive by the Viet Cong come back to America after being rescued carrying a dangerous virus that turns people into cannibals when they are bitten. Cannibal Holocaust. During a rescue mission into the Amazon rainforest, a professor stumbles across lost film shot by a missing documentary crew. This is one of the earlier lost film footage, a 1980 Cannibal Holocaust. White Cannibal Queen. You see the pattern here in 1980? A man who lost an arm and his family to a tribe of cannibals returns 10 years later to bring back his teenage daughter. White Cannibal Queen. A lot of cannibal movies in 1980. The Changeling. Horror and mystery. One of the scariest movies of 1980. After experiencing tragic personal losses, a music professor rents a Seattle mansion haunted by a slain boy. George C. Scott. Now we have Charlie Boy. A carved African fetish with voodoo powers has a dangerous mind of its own. Charlie Boy. So this is a voodoo doll, a figure that starts killing people. Children of the Full Moon. A married couple lost in the woods stumble across a creepy mansion and its inhabitants, an overly kind old woman and deadly wolf children that scour the countryside looking for victims. Christmas Evil. Slasher horror. A toy factory worker mentally scarred as a child upon learning Santa Claus is not real suffers a nervous breakdown after being belittled at work and embarks on a Yuletide killing spree. City of the Living Dead. A reporter and a psychic race to close the gates of hell after the suicide of a clergyman caused them to open, allowing the dead to rise from their graves. City of the Living Dead. Splatter horror, zombie horror. Contamination. A former astronaut helps a government agent and a police detective track the source of mysterious alien pod spores. Contamination. B horror, body horror, space horror. Death Ship. A mysterious ghostly freighter rams and sinks a modern-day cruise ship whose survivors climb aboard the freighter and discover that it is a World War II Nazi torture vessel. Death Ship. Demented. Slasher horror. After being gang raped and institutionalized, a woman suffers nightmares while under the care of her unfaithful husband and finally snaps when a group of masked youths decides to invade her house. Demonoid. Spouses looking for silver in Mexico find a 300-year-old severed hand driven by a demon. Demonoid horror. This movie will not disappoint. A lot of jump scares. Devil Hunter. A young woman modeling in South America is kidnapped for ransom in the jungle when a Vietnam veteran is going to rescue her, only to find out that the jungle is filled with cannibals. What's with all these cannibals in 1980? Dr. Franken. Manhattan surgeon Franken rebuilds the broken body of a John Doe patient with spare parts. Don't answer the phone. A deeply disturbed Vietnam veteran terrorizes the young woman of Los Angeles and taunts a radio psychologist with descriptions of his grisly crimes. Don't answer the phone. Don't go in the house. See the pattern here? A disturbed young man who has been burdened as a child by a sadistic mother stalks women with a flamethrower. He's killing people with a flamethrower. Dracula, Sovereign of the Damned. In this animated adaptation of the Tomb of Dracula comic book series, Dracula assumes control of a satanic cult and follows a child. Dracula, Sovereign of the Damned. Next we have is La Dinastia de Dracula, Dracula's Dynasty. In the 16th century, the Inquisition condemns Count Orloff, a vampire and sorcerer, to death. Horror, mystery, and thriller. Dressed to Kill, with Michael Caine and Angie Dickinson. A mysterious blonde woman kills one of her psychiatrist patients, then goes after the high-class call girl who witnesses the murder. Dressed to Kill is scary and spooky. Eaten Alive. A young woman teams up with mercenaries to find her missing sister in the jungles of New Guinea, where they find that a deranged leader of a religious cult has located his commune and inhabited by cannibals. This is what, the 7th movie of cannibals? Effects. Some crew members of a company shooting a horror film begin to suspect that the killings in the movie are real and that they are actually making a snuff film. Effects. Horror. Encounter of the spooky kind. A rickshaw driver's wife and his rich client are secret lovers, and they decide to get rid of him without being implicated. Encounters of the spooky kind. Erotic Nights of the Living Dead. With a 20-year-old lease on a tropical island, horny John heads out with Fiona on a yacht, skippered by horny Larry, to inspect the island for resort development. Erotic Nights of the Living Dead. Estigma. The death of Sebastian's father engenders in him pathological fears and hallucinations. Supernatural horror, horror and mystery. Estigma. A lot of weird movies in 1980, aren't there? Evils of the Night. Vacationing teens are systematically kidnapped and taken to a strange rural hospital run by a mysterious group that needs their blood. Evils of the Night. Horror and sci-fi. Fade to Black, one of my favorite movies of all time in 1980. A shy, lonely film buff embarks on a killing spree against those who browbeat and betray him, all the while stalking his idol, a Marilyn Monroe look-alike. Fiend. An evil spirit possesses the corpse of a diseased man and must absorb the life energy of the living. Horror. Fiend will not disappoint. A lot of jump scares and kills. Friday the 13th, the blockbuster of 1980. A group of teenage camp counselors attempt to reopen an abandoned summer camp with a tragic past, but they are stalked by a mysterious, relentless killer. Funeral Home. A young woman arrives at her grandmother's house, which used to be a funeral home, to help her turn the place into a bed and breakfast inn. After they open, however, guests begin disappearing and turning up dead. This movie is good. And here's another one, Cries in the Night. It's the same movie as Funeral Home, but it was released in Italy, and that's the other poster. Funeral Home or Cries in the Night. Growing Pains. An old book containing a strange poem resurrects a vengeful spirit from the dead. Growing Pains, originally an episode of British horror anthology TV series Hammer House of Horror. Guest House. Christopher goes to meet a woman at a remote guest house for exorcism. Wearing an expensive diamond ring, he gets murdered that night for the ring, and his hand is brutally chopped off. Guest House. He Knows You're Alone is everything that Halloween was. It's a copy. He Knows You're Alone is awesome. A young bride-to-be is being stalked by a serial killer in Staten Island. This movie is Halloween 10.0. Heaven and Hell. Actors David and Alexander join director Chang and the rest of the 5 Deadly Venomous crew for a supernatural marital arts epic, Heaven and Hell. Hell of the Living Dead, or Virus. After an experiment goes wrong, a virus that turns people into zombies spreads through New Guinea. Hell of the Living Dead, or vice versa, it's called Virus. Hex. A man who believes that he has murdered his wife sees her return as a vengeful ghost. Crime, horror, and thriller. Hex. The House That Bled to Death. William and Emma buy a run-down old house in which a brutal murder occurred years before. The House That Bled to Death. The Beast Carnival. A hitman working for the Yakuza double-crosses his employers and flees with a cache of diamonds from his latest heist. The Beast Carnival. Crime, horror, and thriller. Another camping movie, Humanoids from the Deep. Humanoid sea creatures start killing a fishing town's residents and raping their women. Monster, horror, and sci-fi. This movie is awesome. Nightmare City. An airplane exposed to radiation lands, and blood-drinking zombies emerge armed with knives, guns, and teeth. Nightmare City. It will not disappoint. Inferno. An American student investigates the disappearance of his sister and the death of a friend, both connected from New York to Rome by an old alchemy book. Inferno. Island Claws. A biological experiment in Florida goes awry. The result, 8-foot-long land crabs which roar loudly and kill everything in sight. Island Claws. Horror. Little Tragedies. How far can a man overcome by destructive passion go? And does he realize that slavish worship of irresistible desires always entails retribution? Little Tragedies. Drama, history, and horror. Lost Souls. Illegal immigrants from mainland China are smuggled into Hong Kong. They are captured by a gang, then raped, tortured, and murdered. Lost Souls. Macabre. A middle-aged woman traumatized from the death of her adulterous lover moves into a room at a New Orleans boarding house where the blind landlords become suspicious to her activities. Macabre. Mama Dracula. Satire, comedy, and horror. A female vampire must bathe in the blood of virgins in order to stay alive. Mama Dracula. Next up we have is the classic Maniac. Look at that movie poster. A psychopathic man goes on a killing and mutilation spree in New York City. Maniac. Serial killer, slasher horror, splatter horror. See? Slasher started in 1980. Monstroid. A rural Colombian village is attacked by a horrible sea serpent, aroused by industrial pollution of a nearby lake. Horror and sci-fi. Monstroid. And here we have another competing movie poster for the film Monstroid, also called Monster. Monster was the original title. Monstroid or Monster will not disappoint. Mother's Day. Two brothers kidnap and brutalize 3 women for the pleasure of their demented mother. Remember Friday the 13th? Halloween. People are now capitalizing on holiday of the year. Mother's Day. Again, New Year's Evil. What did I just say? During a New Year's Eve celebration, a Los Angeles disc jockey receives a phone call saying that when New Year strikes, in each time zone, someone will be murdered, and she will be the last one. Night of Death. Young Martine begins working as a nurse at Deadlock House, a secluded grand retirement home. But from the beginning, not everything is as it seems. Night of Death. The Night of the Hunted. Futuristic asylum residents in a skyscraper suffer insanity amnesia. Blank-eyed inmates roam halls of Black Tower as tension escalates and bodies pile up. The Night of the Hunted. Nightmare City. Again, forgive me for this repeat, I just discovered it. Let's blow through this. Nightmare City is a B-horror, body horror, and zombie horror. If you like zombies, you'll love Nightmare City. Stage fright. Slasher horror. A stage actress who is hiding a deep trauma over the car accident that killed her mother finds herself living a new nightmare. Stage fright. Original title, Nightmares. Night of the Demon. An anthropologist and his students attempt to track down a Bigfoot responsible for a rash of violent murders, only to uncover something even more sinister. Night of the Demon. Patrick Still Lives. 5 people receive an anonymous letter revealing a secret of theirs and inviting them to come stay at a mansion that houses a clinic run by a corrupt doctor who experiments on the brain of his comatose son. Phobia. A psychiatrist involved in a radical new therapy comes under suspicion when his patients are murdered, each according to their individual phobias. Drama, horror, and thriller. Motel Hell. A seemingly friendly farmer and his sister kidnap unsuspecting travelers and bury them alive, using them to create a special meat they are famous for. Gross. So they're serving up food at the diner and it's people. The Silent Scream. During her first semester at college, a co-ed finds housing at a seaside mansion where, following the death of a fellow student, she becomes entangled in a murder scheme. The Silent Scream. Prom Night. Leslie Nielsen and Jamie Lee Curtis. At a high school senior's prom, a masked killer stalks 4 teenagers who are responsible for the accidental death of a classmate 6 years earlier. Rude Awakening. A real estate broker finds himself having dreams that seem to be incredibly real. Rude Awakening will not disappoint. A lot of jump scares and kills. Look at that movie poster. Savage Hunt of King of Stock. A mystical drama based on story of V. Korlovic. The film is set in full-out Belusian woodlands at the end of the 19th century. Savage Hunt of King Stock. Scared to Death. An ex-cop now working as a hack novelist is called out of retirement to help investigate a string of deaths. Horror and sci-fi. Scared to Death. Schizoid. An advice columnist in the midst of getting a divorce begins receiving threatening notes from an anonymous stalker. Slasher horror, drama, and horror. Schizoid. Terror on Tour. A rock band called The Clowns comes under suspicion of murder when several prostitutes are killed by individuals made up like members of the band. Terror on Tour. Slasher horror. Terror Train. 3 years after a prank went terribly wrong, the 6 college students responsible are targeted by a mass killer at a New Year's Eve party aboard a moving train. Terror Train. The music of Eric Zahn. Charles Dexter Ward, a young student of metaphysics, befriends Eric Zahn, an elderly violinist who lives on the floor above him. The music of Eric Zahn. The Beasts. A father seeks revenge from a gang of thugs who raped his daughter and murdered his son. The Beasts. Horror and thriller. The Blood Lady. The folktale about Bloody Lady Bethorny, doomed to bathe in the blood of young girls in order to be forever youthful herself. Okay, so this woman bathes in the blood of young girls to stay youthful herself. How creepy is that? This is animation, drama, and horror. The Long Island Cannibal Massacre. This is, I believe, is number 8. The cannibal film number 8. A series of horrible murders prompts a massive police investigation. Slasher horror, horror, and thriller. More cannibals. The Attic. A librarian devotes her life to caring for her wheelchair-bound, tyrannical father after being stood up at the altar. Horror and thriller. The Attic. This movie is creepy. The Ghost Dance. The spirit of a long-dead warrior possesses the body of an Indian medicine man and turns him into a homicidal maniac. Slasher, horror, and thriller. The Ghost Dance. The Godsend. When a strange woman has her baby at the Marlowe's house, then disappears, Kate Marlowe is forced to keep the baby. Drama and horror. The Godsend. The Hearse. A schoolteacher moves into her deceased aunt's home in a small town, only to find herself plagued by supernatural occurrences and unexplained hostility from the local townspeople. The Hearse. Drama, horror, and thriller. The Return. In New Mexico, an alien spacecraft abducts 2 young children and an old man. 25 years later, the children are returned as adults. The Return. mystery, sci-fi, horror, and thriller. The Shining. A family heads to an isolated hotel for the winter, where a sinister presence influences the father into violence. Psychological drama and psychological horror. The Shining will not disappoint. The Watcher in the Woods. When a family moves to a country home, the young girls experience strange happenings that have a link to an occult every year. Next up we have is The Children. A nuclear plant leak turns a busload of children into murderous atomic zombies with black fingernails. Horror and sci-fi. The Children, I guess this is what? More cannibals and more zombies all through 1980. The Fog. An unearthly fog rolls into a small coastal town exactly 100 years after a ship mysteriously sank in its waters. The Fog. Slasher horror. House on the Edge of the Park. Two low-life punks invite themselves to a party at a posh villa after being taunted by their snobbish hosts. House on the Edge of the Park. And to all a good night. Beautiful prep school students face Yuletide horror when a killer in Santa Claus suit stalks their campus. Slasher horror, and mystery. To all a good night. Toxic zombies. Marijuana grows deeper in the woods are hit with a new toxic herbicide, and they will turn into mindless cannibals, killing everyone they come into contact with. Toxic zombies will not disappoint. Trauma. A group of people spend a weekend at a remote villa. Soon, one by one, they are picked off by a homicidal maniac. Trauma will not disappoint. We love Trauma. We love it. The Two Faces of Evil. A family on holiday stopped to pick up a mysterious hitchhiker. Originally an episode of British horror anthology Hammer House of Horror. The Two Faces of Evil. Visitor from the Grave, this time with Elvira. A former mental patient kills her would-be rapist, but his corpse returns from its secret grave. Visitor from the Grave. And Elvira. We're going to eat you. A secret agent investigates a village that is populated by crazed, inbred animals. Witch's Brew. This remake of Fritz Leiber's novel Conjure Wife is more of a horror spoof. Body swap comedy, and horror. Witch's Brew will not disappoint. Without Warning. I love this movie. It was creepy and scary. Sandy and Greg are teenagers who go camping despite warnings not to with their friends. Horror, sci-fi, and thriller. Without Warning. Zombie Holocaust. An expedition in the East Indies encounters not only the cannibals they were looking for, but also an evil scientist and a zombie army. Zoom In. Rape Apartments. Seiko, a somewhat enigmatic young woman, is brutally beaten with a crock and raped by a man wearing a dark-colored mask. Zoom In. Sex Apartments. Those were the best films, the scariest films, the frightening films of 1980. What were some of your favorite films of 1980 that you remember or may not? Have you seen all these movies? 80% of them, 90% of them? Let me know in the comment section below. Also, we're kicking off the 80s decade. We're tackling horror movies, the best horror movies of every year of the 1980s. We're going to tackle the 80 through 1989. Right now, we just finished and wrapped up the year 1980. I'm Tony. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, leave them below. We're going all out on Horror Fest at Yesteryear TV. You love horror? You want to know what movies came out? Are you missing any movies? Well, this is the place to be. I'm going to give you the best in pop culture, television, music, and film. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll see you all in the next video. Stay tuned. We're going to be covering the best horror films of 1981. We'll see you then.